This hearing will come to order. First of all, I want to welcome all of our witnesses here. Appreciate your thoughtful testimony. The hearing is called, the title is Examining Federal Improper Payments and Errors in the Death Master File. And in particular, we have a very interesting witness who has certainly been the victim of inaccuracies in our death master file. And Miss Judy Rivers from Logan, Alabama, and Miss Rivers, I have to say that when I read your testimony, and I would really recommend everybody reading the full testimony. It's quite the story. But I was struck by, very early on, you made the statement, it's often been said that Washington, D.C. is the capital of unintended consequences. And we're going to be seeing that here today. But what I would like to say that we're going to start off with Ms. Rivers testifying, and then I'm going to offer every senator a chance to ask one question, no statements, because then we have to move on with the rest of the panel. We are somewhat time constrained, but we really want to hear Ms. Rivers' story. It's a powerful testament of unintended consequences. But I've got a written opening statement, which I'll enter in the record without objection. And what I'd really like to do is turn it over to our ranking member, Senator Tom Carper, who has really done yeoman work on this particular issue for, I won't say how many years, but you've certainly been dedicated to trying to correct the problem of improper payments in the Federal Government. So I think you probably have a few words to say, and I'll turn it over to you. This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome all the witnesses here. We've got, I think, some excellent people here to describe the visa waiver program, both the benefits and the potential vulnerabilities. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because we have two panels, but just basically point out this is a program that dates back to 1986. The first countries that entered into this cooperative type of arrangement with us was the United Kingdom and Japan, and currently we have 38 different countries that participate in this. It obviously was designed to ease travel, to promote commerce, and I think it's done a really good job of that. Today there's 19 million visitors that enter the U.S. using this for a period of under 90 days. It's about 40% of everybody that comes to America. So you can see the significance of this program. Unfortunately, with the threats we face today, particularly with ISIS, particularly with one number being used as 3,400 foreign fighters that are coming from the West, we have to review this program for potential vulnerabilities. But I think it's safe to say that the standards have been created after 9/11. When we took a look at this and tried to strengthen the security standards with our participating partner countries, I think there's a great deal to be said in terms of enhancing security. So again, the purpose of this hearing is to lay out that reality, fully explore the benefits, as well as honestly take a look at potential vulnerabilities caused by these new and emerging and growing threats, and see if there's anything we can do to help Secretary Jay Johnson in his efforts of keeping this nation safe, see if there's something we need to do legislatively. On that end, I appreciate Senator Ayotte's dedication to this and joining in the letter with myself and Ranking Member Carper, again offering our willingness to work with the Secretary to strengthen this program. So with that, I'll end my comments and turn over to our Ranking Member, Senator Carper.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Kelly, thank you for seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I'll start with questioning. What we're talking about here is really we're comparing a visa program versus a visa waiver program. So I'd like whoever thinks they're best to answer this question, I want that exact comparison. I mean, Mr. Jenkins, you talked about lines of defenses. I mean, compare, for example, what happens today in Poland where they don't have a visa waiver program in terms of one of their citizens trying to get in the United States. What are they going to go through versus what is the citizen of the United Kingdom going to go through, and where's the enhanced security versus where are the vulnerabilities of going through the actual visa process versus the visa waiver? Let's start with you, Secretary Chertoff.
I would say, Mr. Chairman, the main difference is in the interview. I mean, what ESTA does in effect is it collects the same basic information you would normally collect in a visa process, but you'll have an interview with a consular official if you're in a visa country. That often tends to be, from a scheduling standpoint and a distance standpoint, a little bit of an impediment, which is one of the reasons countries like to be in the visa waiver program. Now, does an interview at the time of the visa add something yes. Although we do interview people when they come into the U.S., and if we do pre-clearance, we interview them before they board the plane. Is the interview foolproof? No. I mean, if you look back to the 9/11, some of the hijackers got into the country with visas. They were obviously interviewed. So I would say the marginal value of the interview, at least as it relates to terrorism issues, is to my mind, not great. And remember, the process of having these kinds of interviews originally began at a time we were focused on people who were going to overstay. They were going to come to the U.S. and not leave, and they didn't have a job at home. So although I don't want to understate the value of the interview, particularly in some countries. And I know we have, for example, DHS personnel in some of the Middle Eastern countries who do some interviewing and some work with the local intelligence agencies. I think, at least as it relates to Western Europe, it is of marginal value, but the measures put in place since then, coupled with our better intelligence analytic capabilities, I think largely closes that gap.
During those physical interviews, basically, do we fill out an ESTA application so that, the result of that is you basically go into the exact same process, exact same security system as we have with the visa waiver program, but you just have that additional physical interview? Is it the exact same way that way, or are there differences? Dr. Frey, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm nodding. Yes, Chairman, that's generally right. I would say as a couple of points to that. One, the VWP deals with one particular category of visa, the so-called B visa for business or tourism purposes up to 90 days. So even in visa waiver countries, if personnel are coming for other reasons, they still have to go through the visa process. So just so we're clear on the scope of what we're talking about. ESTA, and ESTA gives us and gives the government enough information to run the vetting against the same databases that the visa applicants are run against. There are other questions on a visa form, but most of those relate to, as the Secretary noted, to economic issues. Do you have a job at home? Do you have a house? Things like that. And so the vetting is precisely the same. And then once you're done with that process, the layers that we've been hearing about that CBP performs, the PNR vetting, the airline information vetting, the vetting done at the ports of entry, that is precisely the same for all travelers, whether they come with a visa or with a visa waiver program. And I guess the final thing I would add for an apples-to-apples comparison is the interview, which again is not, you shouldn't discount the interview, but that happens the first time you apply. And many of these citizens from these countries get 10-year visas that are good for multiple entries during those 10 years. So after that first time, it's essentially like VWP anyway, without the additional ESTA every 2 years.
With 40% of travelers going through the visa waiver program, let's say well, first of all, with that statistic, with that reality right now, are we already having backlogs in certain embassies in terms of the non-visa waiver countries where there may be pressure on embassy and consulate personnel to quickly do an interview and not be as thorough as what might be required with the visa waiver program? Is that a possibility? And if we were to move away from a visa waiver program, would we start overwhelming a system and potentially reduce security? Mr. Jenkins.
In all of these matters of screening processes and intelligence processes, volume is an issue. And if we were to take the statistics that were cited at the introduction to this hearing, if we were to take the 19 million people currently traveling to the United States on the visa waiver program and dump them back into the consular interview process, we would either have a tremendous backlog or we would end up really overwhelming the consular capability to handle that kind of volume, and then you worry about an erosion of performance. So while I agree that the interview process is an important component, to expand its capacity to deal with the kinds of volumes that it would be faced with would not guarantee us necessarily an improvement in performance.
So I'm concerned right now, are there countries where there's such a backlog Have you heard reports where people aren't being thoroughly interviewed, where, even just the visa system itself might create a greater security risk than having a visa waiver program?
I think probably the State Department is best positioned to answer this, but I've certainly heard over the years in certain countries complaining about long wait periods, the lack of availability of consular offices in remote areas. I think they've moved to some degree to doing it via, telepresence of some kind. But all of these things do wind up, there's a risk of eroding the value of the interview. And again, the more skilled the person trying to get in is, the harder it is to detect it. So there's no question that dumping more people into the system would run the risk of actually affecting even those interviews that continue to operate in visa waiver countries, because as Dr. Frey said, we do interview for visas other than the quick tourist or business visa.
I wanted to catch the Secretary before he has to leave. Coming from a manufacturing background, I'm familiar with ISO certification, and that occurs, I think the full audits are once every 2 or 3 years, but then you have 6-month surveillance audits. And in testimony and prior meetings, these evaluations, these audits occur every 2 years. Would it be much of a burden? Would it have value to go into, there's only 38 countries, with a skinny down team, at least doing a surveillance audit every 6 months just to keep things up to date? Would that have value? Would that be too great a burden on the Department? Would that be a good idea?
I think in terms of the Department's current resources, you'll have to ask them in terms of, obviously we're all living in a time of budget discipline, and all these things cost money. I think, within reason, increasing the frequency, at least of light surveillance audits, always adds value. The challenge is, of course, if you're overseas and dealing with host countries, they have their own issues. But I think in principle, at least asking the question and saying what additional could be done between 2-year periods is a good way of remediating problems that may be cropping up that you're not aware of. And I would say that after what happened in Europe in the last few months, the Europeans may be more in a mindset to work with us on that than would have been the case perhaps a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank the Chairman for holding this.
Thank you, Mr. Ramatowski. I think I'll start with you. The question I was asking of the last panel, based on Secretary Chertoff's comment about how important this visa waiver program really is in terms of our outreach to certainly Eastern European countries. In light of that, are there any requirements within the program for qualification that are either too high or too low? I mean, in other words, are the requirements, are the hurdles set at an appropriate level?
Mr. Chairman, I think some of the countries that wish to join the program might say that the statutory requirement for a 3% visa refusal rate is their most difficult hurdle to cross, because that's one thing that they can't directly affect through their own actions. When we are interviewing applicants for U.S. visas, we make our decision on a case-by-case basis on that applicant's individual circumstances. And it's the aggregate of those decisions that determine the overall visa refusal rate. And current law requires a rate of 3% or less to join the program, and that's a difficult hurdle for some countries to meet.
So I understand that those countries have a problem with it. Does the State Department, does this administration think that maybe is too high a hurdle? And should that be potentially revisited? In the past,
the administration has endorsed proposals made in Congress to consider a 10% refusal rate, and in the past the rate has been at 10% for a period of time. And so the Department of State would support those efforts.
Okay, well, thank you. We did have a couple of suggestions in terms of potential legislative initiatives to help strengthen the program. One by Secretary Chertoff talked about maybe we could increase the requirements for information intelligence sharing. Mr. Crumans, would you agree with that? Would that help strengthen the Department's hands in trying to negotiate better compliance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we actually have a pretty robust system in place with respect to that kind of information sharing, and I just want to emphasize, and in preparation for this hearing, in collaboration with our interagency partners, 5,500 information about 5,500 known and suspected terrorists have been provided to us by our visa waiver program partners already. But so those agreements are in place. Those agreements are working. I mean, I think what was discussed in the first panel was also their own abilities, and we're working with them to improve some of their abilities. And I think that is something we want to continue to focus on as part of that partnership that we have with them. Now, they know more about their citizens than we do, and so that is something that we continue to work on to improve. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I think in the agreements we have in place in that area, I think are quite strong. And as they build their systems, the PNR that was talked about in the previous panel, I think they'll be in an even stronger position to share lessons learned, knowledge about the kinds of travel patterns that they're seeing, and of course, the particular suspicious and criminal and terrorist individuals that they're encountering and preventing from traveling.
Now, it is the department that is charged with doing these every 2-year audits, correct? Not the
Yes, Mr.
department?
Chairman. Yes, sir.
Again, having come from the business world with the ISO certification with 6-month surveillance audits, that was one of the questions I asked the last panel. Is that something that you think would be helpful to, again, not a full-blown audit, but just a skinny down with the fewer personnel, just checking in on a surveillance basis on a more frequent basis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that it's clear about what we do. What we do now, when we say we make the biennial assessments, we already have the capability, and there's one country that I won't name that is under a provisional status. So they're getting more frequent reviews. We already have that capability to do more frequent reviews and do that when it's warranted. And it's important to mention that these biennial reviews, because in many cases, in most countries, it is every 2 years. It is not as if we do the 2-year review and then don't look at them. The reviews take from 6 to 9 months. It's a pretty intensive period of information collection from our interagency partners and working with the host government, working with the embassy there overseas, learning from other agencies how they are cooperating with their counterparts, and then compiling the data, vetting it, checking it, and then writing the reports. That's a pretty intensive period. But then in that year and a half, when we're not in the active cycle, they're still subject to continuous monitoring. On a daily basis, we're hearing the statistics daily, weekly, monthly basis from CBP. What is CBP's experience with respect to people arriving at the port of entry? Are we starting to turn around a larger number of them? We would see an uptick there. Or from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, are they starting to see any issues with removal of people? Because BWP countries are required to accept the return of their citizens. From Interpol, the lost and stolen passport database, are there any problems? Are these countries still reporting as they're supposed to on a regular basis, many 20, 30 times a month?
So you're saying there's really continuous monitoring?
There's
already?
continuous monitoring.
Okay, well, that's comforting. Senator Booker was talking about the exit system, and the response was we don't have the money. Have there been cost estimates on kind of a layered basis, maybe biometrics exit system for airline travel? I mean, does the department have any of those estimates prepared, or is that something that you'll have to work up?
I may turn to my colleague on specific estimates, but I might just want to mention one thing to highlight, because it was discussed in that previous panel. We do have currently an operation with Canada, so that a land entry into Canada from the United States counts as an exit from the United States. 2.5 million records we've already gotten in this project. Now, and we'd like to do the same with Mexico, a little bit more of a challenge there, but to have that capability with Canada has been very valuable in order to help us get a better understanding of those leaving the country.
Okay, I was looking for costs. Ms. Dugan.
Chairman, there have been costs associated. I think the issue is that the idea of what the solution would look like is really something that we're testing. So what is feasible without causing a great deal of difficulty on the departure. So we're very excited about a number of pilots that we're going to be running this year with regard to biometrics. And in this spring, we're going to have a pilot program in Otay Mesa with a biometric exit and the pedestrian environment. We're also running a biometric mobile pilot in Atlanta this spring, and a facial recognition pilot in Dulles starting in April. So we have a number of environments where we'd like to test possible solutions and where we can go that's going to be feasible and still facilitating for the traveling public. We have a test facility in Landover, Maryland, that we, in partnership, are working with the Science and Technology Group. And it's very exciting, as the panelists mentioned, that there's so many changes with biometrics. I think that solution is viable. We're just looking for what is feasible, and it may not be the same solution across all environments.
Okay.
So,
again, the other panel said the problem was a cost problem, and I realize that with technology, those costs should be declining. But again, just to simply, have there been cost estimates? Is the Department aware of that? Is that something that has to be developed? I realize you're testing different systems, but are there cost estimates? Just give us some kind of ballpark what we're talking about here in terms of appropriations.
well, the reason the resources have been, resource implication has been high is really with regard to the officer involvement. So when we did tests several years ago, the requirement would be to increase the number of officers that would have to be doing those outbound inspections.
Really, it's just, are there cost estimates or not that we can get from the Department? Or is that something, just real quick answer, just yes or no, I want to
Mr.
move on.
Chairman, I'm more than happy to take that question and
Okay.
and
Do it for the
answer
record,
you.
thanks.
Yep.
Senator Carper.